Welcome to another episode of the Three Guys Analyze podcast. This is your host, Matt. Joining us to the west is Mr. Tony Crier, and joining us from the north, Mr. Rick Martin. Guys, thanks for joining us today. We got a lot to talk about. Big weekend that happened in college football this past week, and we got a lot to talk about with the rankings and some games to look forward to this coming weekend. So we're going to start off with the early game that happened, Minnesota versus Penn State. Now, we know Tony is on the Minnesota bandwagon. Ricky dislikes every Big Ten team. So we're going to start with Tony. Tony, what are your takeaways from the Minnesota defeat of Penn State?
You know, I said for 2 weeks that Minnesota was a great team and they were vastly underrated. And I think this was the start of the upward trajectory I was talking about last week. I mean, they played great. Honestly, this is a very young football team. Tanner Morgan, their quarterback, is only a sophomore. Their stud receiver, Rashad Bateman, he's only a sophomore. Their entire tight end class is a junior or lower. They have a lot of young players on this team. Heck, one of their standout players from the game was their right tackle, and 400 pounds. Is the right tackle, Falafu. He's only a freshman. He's very raw still. I mean, this whole performance was definitely one of the, honestly, the best games this year. You know, it felt like in the first half, every play went Minnesota's way. They had the 2 interceptions early, you know, the quick touchdown pass, and they had what I thought was the most perfect jailbreak screen execution I have ever seen. And overall, I mean, Tanner Morgan, he was 18 of 20, 339 yards, 3 touchdowns. Very efficient, for sure. But however, I did have problems in the second half when, PJ Fleck, he says his mentor is Jim Tressel, and he definitely said that if he gets a lead in the fourth quarter, the second half, he's going to Tressel ball. And he definitely did. And you could tell as Penn State was mounting their unsuccessful comeback, that a lot of that offense lost its rhythm. And I was actually you were watching deep into the fourth quarter, and I mean, you kind of had that feeling Penn State might actually pull this off.
Yeah, it was a close game, especially in the second half. I mean, Minnesota only scores 1 touchdown in the second half to stretch to 31-19, and Penn State scores with 3:49 left, and you thought there might have been a chance. I think we've all watched enough Ohio State games to know that Tressel ball, man. If you can win by a point, that's all that really matters. So, Ricky, I know you're pretty down in Big Ten, at least the other teams besides Ohio State. What were your takeaways, Minnesota, Penn State?
I think this just proves Big Ten mediocrity, right? I mean, I still contend Minnesota is to probably the top 5, maybe 6 teams in the SEC. I think that just from a talent perspective, eventually that catches up with you. I don't care how good of a coach PJ Fleck is. We've seen it over and over again with football, especially getting to the college level. You really need a roster that is 50-plus players deep of 5, 4, and 3-star recruits. I mean, Minnesota's recruiting class doesn't even contain 1 player that was in the ESPN. So I think that is a huge disadvantage moving forward against top competition. But no, this game was the usual underdog can win if you are at home, can get some big plays early and win the turnover battle. So they checked all the boxes. I think the opening drive, Penn State was gaining some momentum. Huge interception by Minnesota. They hit on a 60-something yard touchdown pass a few plays later. And, I mean, you could not have asked for a better start to this football game if you're a Minnesota fan. And they just rode that wave throughout the rest of the game. So they checked all the boxes of a formula to make a big upset. I'm happy for them. I think, they've got a chance to enter the Big Ten championship game undefeated, where I think that they will be a 17 to 20 point underdog to Ohio State. Again, I don't know whether you want to say Ohio State's that much better than everyone else in the Big Ten or that the Big Ten is just not that good. But I think you guys know where I stand on that statement.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and I'll be honest. I didn't think Minnesota was any good. I know PJ Fleck, He's a guy that likes to motivate his kids. And, well, I think we all kind of should have known, James Franklin is coaching, and when's the last time he's won a big game of any sort of consequence? And they really laid an egg. And I don't know, maybe Penn State hadn't been tested. I know people really try to talk them up. They got that number 4 ranking playoff. But you know what? Minnesota, they came in and they dominated from the onset. And they controlled the ball. And, Tanner, 18 of 20 for 339.
Highly efficient.
I mean, that's hard to do if you're passing against air. Trust me, I've seen it. It's tough. And they look good. Tony said they slowed it down, come down the end. But, they scored when they needed to. Now, I don't know how good Minnesota is because I don't know how good Penn State is. And it's hard to say. They're 6-0. They're in conference, 9-0 overall. And like Ricky, you said, they're going to be a big underdog against Ohio State. But, the underdog, they seem to wear that card, that stripe pretty well. And I'm sure if it gets to that point when they're in that title game, I'm going to be a little bit afraid if I'm an Ohio State fan. I don't know what they're going to do. I've seen Ohio State choke some games away before. And there's going to be a little if there in that game for me. I don't know. It's just one of those things.
So you would be afraid if Minnesota played Ohio State?
I think what I'm saying is the aspect of you just never know. Okay, especially with the Minnesota team, they're going to come into that game with nothing to lose. No one expected them to be there. If there's a look-ahead game for Ohio State, it's definitely going to be that one. It's not going to be Michigan.
Let's put it this way. I would feel as confident as I felt with them playing Northwestern last year. So
yeah, and I get it. I
disagree.
So Tony,
you're driving the Minnesota bandwagon. So of course
I am. But I think Minnesota. I think that you sit there and you watch the game and maybe we had the Big Ten wrong. Maybe Penn State's not as good as what we think they are, and maybe Penn State or Minnesota is a lot better. I mean, there's always that surprise team, and I think Minnesota this year is. I mean, what would happen if they entered the Big Ten title game undefeated? I see it happening at this point. I mean, at that point, I could see them being anywhere between 7 and 10 point underdogs. And with that being said, at this point, I don't think so. Not if they went out beating Iowa, Northwestern, and Wisconsin.
Yeah, I mean that they still got to win out. They still got a lot of games to play. That Wisconsin game's going to be tough. Like the only thing I'm saying is, whenever Ohio State would go play Indiana, and there was always that feeling that Indiana could score 40 points on them from a broken play here, a broken play there. And there's always a little if. And I'm not saying I'd be fearful, but there'd be a little thing. I'm like, well, let's get on these guys pretty fast and put them out of the game.
But what's weird is this Ohio State team feels different than any Ohio State team in recent memory. Because I do agree with you, Matt. I think that there was always, like, in years past when they've gotten beat by the Purdue's of the world, it was like I was shocked, but I was surprised, but I wasn't shocked. This team, I don't know. This is the most complete team since 2014, I think. And it just feels if they have Chase Young on the field, which he's going to have a 1-game suspension or one more game suspension. So I don't know. I don't think that Minnesota is going to have an answer for Chase Young and anything on our defense. I would be surprised if they score over 18, 21 points in the Big Ten championship game if they make it that far.
And I think you're right. I think this is a different Ohio State team, one that we're not totally used to. And I think
that's why there's skepticism for me. Because Ohio State's blown so many big games and big opportunities that you just never know when the next one's going to come.
Yeah, but, we're not playing Clemson. Minnesota is not Clemson, and they're not USC. They're not Texas. So let's keep that in mind. Remember, when I was a kid, the best Minnesota team was the one with Hassad Abdul-Khalik at quarterback and Marion Barber and Lawrence Maroney and Eric Decker.
Lawrence Maroney.
Yeah.
Good call.
Yeah. They had both of them.
Which one had the dreadlocks?
That was, I believe, Maroney had the dreadlocks and the gold teeth.
Yeah.
But
they were great to play with on NCAA football.
Their ceiling was 8-3, 8-4. Now I think PJ Fleck in his short time there has definitely raised the ceiling there.
Yeah, he's got something cooking over there. All right, so that was some good talk on Minnesota Penn State. We'll see how that goes on in the future, whether Minnesota can keep the run on or Penn State maybe can come back and make a play at it and everything. All right, so the big game of last week was LSU versus Bama, and we talked a lot about it on the last pod, and I think we all kind of liked LSU a little bit, and that was a very exciting game. LSU got on it early, and they were on the gas, but they kind of let up, and Alabama made it a game and maybe saved some of their playoff hopes with it. Ricky, what was your instant takeaway from LSU versus Bama?
The instant takeaway was, wow, LSU is good. I wasn't giving LSU the proper credit. I knew that they were good. Okay, let me rephrase. Wow, LSU is great was the takeaway. I, as an Ohio State fan, was extremely terrified watching Joe Burrow carve up that vaunted Alabama defense. Impressed with the play calling offensively from LSU. I love the guts in the fourth quarter when they needed to play a little bit of keep away, but weren't content with just running the ball and trying to milk the clock, that they were actually giving the ball to Joe Burrow and letting him make decisions on that final drive that essentially, basically gave LSU the win. It was very easy for any coach just to say, hand the ball off and we'll put it back in the hands of our defense. But they were calling pass plays. I don't know what defense Alabama was running. They were somehow running this weird, let's sell out on the run, keep our linebackers 5 yards away from the line of scrimmage, and just allow any and every mid tree passing route to be open. So I don't really understand what was going on there from a defensive perspective. But no, I think my takeaway is just that, again, I think Joe Burrow is the real deal. Heisman Trophy is all but his to lose at this point. There was a moment when I thought, just because Alabama being Alabama, they're kind of like the Patriots, where when they were down 12 points and they hit that 80-yard touchdown pass that took 6 seconds off the clock, and I'm like, they're going to get this onside kick and somehow escape with the win. But luckily we were saved from that, and I'm looking forward to seeing what this team can do against Georgia in the SEC title game. I think that's going to be a fantastic matchup. And the other thing I think I took away from this is I would say LSU is all but a lock to get into the college football playoffs. So, barring if they lose twice between now and the end of the year, I think if they make it to SEC title game as an undefeated team, and even if they lose to Georgia in that game, I think they're still going to make it as a one-loss non-champion. So that was my initial reaction.
Yeah, I would agree on every count with that.
Yes.
Quickly before I go to you, Tony. I mean Joey Burrow. If he stays at Ohio State, what are we saying then? But he left, and that's all hindsight's 2020. All right, Tony. Now to you. What is your takeaway? LSU versus Bama.
Well, to respond to that, I think we're fine in the quarterback situation at Ohio State. Joe Burrow, he didn't beat out Dwayne Haskins, so he did what he needed to do to transfer. And, I think by getting Justin Fields, we kind of evened that out. But I think the biggest thing, at halftime, the halftime score was 33-13. And, I just sat there, 20-point lead's not safe. LSU needs to keep going because, for as good as Joe Burrow played, he was highly efficient, 31-39, 3 touchdowns, close to 400 yards. The Bama defense, we're so used to Alabama just, you're not going to run on Alabama. You're not going to score on Alabama. And in this game, and it showed actually, this goes back to the last 2 games that they've actually played someone. You go back to the national title game, and they got pummeled by Clemson. And then in this game here where, besides in the opening quarter, Alabama was never really in the game until they had to make an onside kick attempt. And with that, it was so uncharacteristic Bama for sure. And it definitely showed. I mean, LSU, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he had 20 carries, 103 yards. When's the last time you could name a running back rush for over 100 yards against Alabama? That's just amazing. But I think another takeaway is from the Alabama side, how is Nick Saban going to evolve again from this and keep the dynasty going? I personally I want the dynasty to end now because I'm not a big Alabama fan myself. But, since Nick Saban got there, he's always found the new way to become number one, whether it being through recruiting, through the way he plays his teams play defense, to the way they play offense. And it's interesting to see where Nick Saban's going to go from here, because LSU definitely exposed a lot in terms of where they are recruiting wise, but as well as, where they're at on the field, that, maybe things aren't as Alabama centric as what they used to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think the tide may be turning. I don't know. I think we're at a point now where about Alabama's recruited, and I heard this said about the Patriots in the same way, that they recruit these really big defensive linemen, guys that can stop the run, these huge interior defensive tackles, and they recruit really big linebackers, help stop the run. That generally is what the SEC does, is they run. And when they face these teams that want to spread you out and throw it, then they're putting those really big linebackers in space, and they can't cover all these receivers. And finally, the SEC has a competent quarterback that can throw against it. Where it was Alabama had Tua, and he can throw. Now LSU's got a quarterback that can do the same thing. And I mean, at one point in the first half, it just didn't even look like Alabama could cover them. Like, it just looked like Burrow could step back and make whatever throw he wanted to, that they could nickel and dime Alabama all the way up and down the field. Now, granted, Burrow, I didn't know this. Like, that kid is one heck of an athlete. Like, it breaks down, and he's running, and he does not go down. He does not slide. He's running through those holes like he's Tony Dorsett, man. He's just going. And that was just so fun to watch. Obviously, like no lead with Alabama is safe. And you just kind of had it in the back of your head. You've seen him come back so many times. And LSU was able to hang on, which was really awesome. What
are we supposed to take away from Alabama's defense against Clemson and now LSU? Because I find it, and I don't have a good answer, because I find it hard to believe that their recruits somehow just forgot how to play football, and that Saban forgot how to coach defense. But they've just gotten absolutely shredded, as Tony said, against the last two real competent quarterbacks and offenses they played. Is that just Saban's not adapting to the new way these offenses are scheming, or they've figured some sort of secret sauce out against his defense? Because if you'd have told me 2 years ago, even 18 months ago, that a Nick Saban defense would be giving up 46 points to LSU, I would have said you're crazy.
No, yeah,
I don't get it.
6 months ago, if you said LSU was going to score 46, I'd call you crazy.
Yeah, but that's an indictment on LSU. But I mean, still, the fact that I don't know how many points Clemson scored in the national title game off the top of my head, but it was over 40, I think. I mean, it's crazy to me that an Alabama Nick Saban coach defense can be that bad.
Does it have something to do with how much turnover and inexperience they have? I mean, they're playing a lot of freshmen. They're playing a lot of sophomores. I mean, does that have something to do with it? Or just the fact that, Nick Saban has to, basically have a new coaching staff every single year?
I think the turnover, especially in coaching, I know that has a lot of effects with it. Offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators. I know they're out like a couple starting linebackers, I think. So, I mean, that has something to do with it. But I don't know. It just seems like they want to play 7 guys in the box and let their back 4 just cover. But, against a team that's going to put 5 guys into routes, it's hard to do that. So, I don't know. It's just, Ohio State beat them with Cardale, spreading the ball out. Clemson has looked really good against them multiple years. LSU this time. So it's like, when Alabama actually has to play a competent spread passing attack, and even with the running back, I didn't see that coming. He was breaking tackles and getting open and getting free. It was really something to watch, and it was probably something we haven't seen a team in the SEC do to Alabama in a long time.
But that leads back to, think about every single team that's beaten Alabama under Nick Saban. They have a mobile quarterback that can run and throw. And, Joe Burrow is now the next. And it just amazes me that, the rest of the SEC, like, they haven't really – I don't know why they have not caught on to this yet. In order to beat Bama, you have what's there. And recruiting's not an issue. You see that in the recruiting rankings. So, at one point do we say that, as good as what the SEC is, it could be a whole lot more competitive for sure. Because right now, it's not as competitive, I guess you would say, as what people would declare.
Yeah. And, maybe Bama's not getting all the recruits that they used to. I've always wondered, Nick Saban just seems so abrasive. Like, is he coming into a recruit's home and, like, giving him the hard sell? Like, I don't know what that's like. But, now that LSU's really good, Auburn, is playing a little bit better now. Florida is doing a little bit better this year. Maybe that'll help even out the playing field, maybe a little bit, I don't know.
Well, it's got to, because, dynasties don't last forever, and Saban wasn't going to be able to stay on top of it. It's already amazing what he's been able to do since he took that job, winning all those national titles, being in the conversation year after year after year after year. It really is like, probably like Wooden-esque, harkening back to the UCLA days, just with how dominant he's been able to be in 2010 era of teams. Clemson coming out of nowhere, winning a national title. These teams and recruits, and everyone's got more talent, and there's more parity. For him to be as good as he has been for so long is really quite spectacular. But yeah, it wasn't going to last forever, and who knows? Maybe we'll look back at the Clemson game as the start of the downfall from Saban's standpoint. It's realistic to think that he's won his last national title, right? Never count the guy out, but how old is he? He's what, 72?
Yeah.
How many more years does he have left? And like Tony or you, Matt, were saying, the SEC is only catching up to him. The coaches in the SEC are very strong right now. And I think that there's going to be a lot of competition moving forward.
I think you're definitely right. Now, I think one of the other final takeaways from this game is coming into this game, maybe it was a close race, but has Joey Burrow put a handcuff around the Heisman Trophy after this performance? Tony, what do you think?
What's weird is we were saying the same thing about Tua last year at this point, that he had it all locked up, and then Kyler Murray went on his run to end the season. But barring a miracle with Hurts and Justin Fields, I don't say I see it's Joey Burrows. If I was a betting man right now, I would probably put money on Justin Fields just for the sole fact that he has, I guess, the best odds per se. I think he's at 8-1 right now at Vegas, but he has the best value pick, I guess you would say, if you were looking for that. But I think it's definitely, Joey Burrows, it's his to win. Now it's just a matter of who's going to join him in New York for the ceremony.
Ricky, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think that, I know what Tony's trying to say. I think that'd be a terrible bet to put anything on Justin Fields, because I think outside of Joey Burrow getting injured in the first half of their next game, I don't see him losing the Heisman Trophy, because, Heisman is one part, what have you done on the field, and one part, what's the narrative surrounding you, right? And so Joey Burrow's got a great narrative. He started Ohio State. He couldn't cut it. He transferred to LSU, was kind of a bit more journeyman last year, wasn't quite the superstar. And now all of a sudden, he's blossomed from someone that was probably maybe sixth, seventh round draft pick into he might parlay this into being a top 10 pick in next year's draft. So yeah. Yeah, so I think that it's there is no Kyler Murray. I think Kyler Murray had that narrative last year. If you want to go back and look at it, there was this baseball player that all of a sudden stepped in his first year starting. He was putting up crazy numbers. Is he going to play baseball? He's making more money than the head coach was with his contract signed with the A's, and it was all this big thing. So Kyler Murray had kind of the intangibles that surround that award year after year. I just don't see anyone in the field right now that has even Justin Fields. I think he just doesn't have the story behind him that Joey Burrow does. I will think it is interesting to note that we could have very realistically in the playoffs a weird kind of dynamic between three of the four quarterbacks that you could have Georgia, LSU, and Ohio State all make the playoffs. And at some point or another, all three of their quarterbacks have that it's like 2 degrees of separation between all of them. So I think that could be an interesting subplot of the playoffs as we move forward.
Yeah, it is definitely nice that if things go to term in the playoff, we're going to have a lot of Heisman contenders and, high draft picks. And that sometimes it doesn't work out that way. I think it's going to work out this way this year, hopefully. And I think you're right. For me, it's Burrow in a landslide. I don't think, unless he just lays several eggs, I don't think he gives it up. If he keeps playing the way he has, I think it's a no-doubter. I don't think anyone can catch him. I don't think a quarterback can catch him. If Chase Young comes back and has 8 sacks against Michigan, maybe, but
I think he missed too much time, though.
He's going to miss wishful. And after watching this past week, I think Chase Young could have had 7 sacks against Maryland. So he really missed an opportunity there. All right.
You know what would be interesting, though? If Joe Burrow did win, he'd be the 3rd consecutive transfer quarterback to win the Heisman Trophy. I find that to be an interesting stat, especially with the way the transfer portal is in the NCAA right now.
Yeah, that is odd, the way the migration of the college athlete. That's for sure. All right, so moving on. So on Tuesday, the college football playoff rankings came in, and the two games we just talked about had a lot to do with what we got. So I'll just read off the top 10 here. So number 1, LSU moves up ahead of Ohio State with their win against Bama at number 1. Ohio State drops number 2. Clemson moves up 2 spots to number 3. Georgia, the one-loss team out of the SEC, comes up to number 4. Alabama drops 2 spots to number 5. Oregon moves up from 7 to 6. Utah up to 7 from 8. And then Minnesota jumps up 9 spots to number 8, 1 spot ahead of Penn State at 9, and then Oklahoma at 8-1 rounds out the top 10. So, Tony, what are your takeaways here from the college football playoff rankings week 2?
What makes it more interesting for me is, I was discussing with a friend of mine. It's weird that, to me, I feel like different teams and different conferences, they're all getting voted by different criteria. Because, if you think about it, so right now Georgia's 4th, and so that means the committee's valuing their wins over Notre Dame and Florida, and that's more important than that loss to South Carolina. However, when you then flip it, Penn State they had quality wins over Iowa and Michigan, but then lost to Minnesota, and somehow they're falling in down at 9th. But then we have Alabama, and here we go. They have no quality wins. We know that their best win is against Texas A&M, and the only thing they have going for them is the fact that, these games haven't been especially close, and they've been covering a lot of spreads. But they have probably the best quality loss. And to me, that just that makes me a little bit crazy to think unless that, somehow Alabama's going to survive all this again, despite having, nothing of caliber on their resume. I think, unless they're going to say Alabama is just going to kind of stay at 5th, it just makes for an interesting argument if, dominoes fall the right way and a little bit more chaos ensues, how how is Alabama going to creep up this year? How are they going to make the playoff despite the fact that they have no business being in the playoff? That's my biggest takeaway right now.
Yeah. Ricky, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't, I guess, see Alabama making the playoff. I think it would take anything is possible, right? But I think it would take a pretty monumentous upsets and some dominoes to fall the right way in order for them to get in. I don't, the committee is. I think that Tony's right. There seems to be some different criteria going on. I don't know how you rank Penn State fourth last week, and then they get beat by Minnesota, but Minnesota is only number 8. I mean, that's the thing that I struggle with the committee and their playoff rankings is it's always been touted as it's a week-to-week thing. And even what happened, obviously you're building over the course of a season, but, quote unquote, they're not afraid. Like the old way was you would do these like incremental moves, right? And so like even if you played and beat really good competition, if you were 15, you might go to 13, then 10, then 9, then 8, and creep your way up. And I know they moved Minnesota up 9 spaces, but for them to still be number 8 after beating what the committee thought was the number 4 team a week ago doesn't necessarily feel right. Especially having Utah and Oregon over them. I guess that's a little confusing. So there does seem to be some different rules going on by different conferences, and they aren't very consistent in how they rank these teams. Personally, I think that the top 4 are correct. I think that Georgia's done enough with their wins that they've made up for the bad loss there to South Carolina. I think Clemson doesn't necessarily, from a performance standpoint on the field this year, deserve to be 3rd, but I also get the fact that they're 10-0, and they've probably got more. See, this is the other part where I struggle, right? Because the committee, it's supposed to be we don't look at what you did last year. We don't look at what you did 2 years ago. We're just looking at what you're doing on the field this year. But Clemson being 3rd and Minnesota being 8th, you can't tell me that's not pedigree, right? That's completely pedigree. It's completely looking at the roster, who's more talented, who's got the more NFL players, who's got those top 250 recruits I was talking about earlier. So, I think that they're generally right. I think, and we'll see, this could all shake up a week, 2, 3 weeks from now. We could have a completely different top 4 from what we showed.
So when I saw these rankings, I had a couple of thoughts. First is obviously Bama only falls to 5. And, I know the moment that they lost, CBS put an image on their screen saying ways Bama can get back into the playoff. So that really it says everything you need to know about how biased CBS is. So I thought that was pretty funny. But, it's like a thing, like obviously LSU deserves to be number 1. I don't care what anyone says. They had better wins than Ohio State does. I know Ohio State's looked really good. Clemson being up there, I still, like, if we were to compare Clemson and Minnesota, like who has Clemson beat as opposed to Minnesota. Now, I'm not saying Minnesota should be in the top 4, but the same thing goes for Clemson. Who have they beat? But I know they've looked good in some of their wins. Georgia being number 4, fine, I guess. They have some good wins. They beat Oregon, who's number 6. I think, Tony, you mentioned it. I don't see a way, honestly, if the things play out as we think they will, Alabama has any real shot of getting back into the playoff. I think they're positioning Oregon to possibly get in as that number 4 if they went out and they win.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where the committee's heading. That as long as Oregon can win the Pac-12, they're in. I would say the same for Utah. I mean, despite the fact that their best win is currently BYU and their losses against USC, but I think they're trying, like Alabama still quote unquote has a shot, but they don't have a shot.
Yeah. I think if Baylor maybe hasn't the farthest of outside shots if they go in and just dominate the teams they play. But honestly, I think a one-loss Oklahoma has a better shot of getting in. But I think,
Then
honestly, that the fourth team for me at the end of when this all said and done is either going to be Oregon or a one-loss SEC team. And I'll pray and hope that it's not Alabama. You know, the only team I like rooting against more than Alabama is Golden State. And now half of Golden State's team is on the IR. So there's no point. They're the worst team in the NBA.
Well, let me pose this question. I mean, what if going into that Big Ten title game, Ohio State and Minnesota are both undefeated, and Minnesota loses close? Would they have a say at that fourth spot?
I don't think.
No.
Look, this is
absolutely not.
The NCAA still wants to make money. They're not making any money off of Minnesota.
I mean,
it's not telling to you that Minnesota is undefeated right now and just beat the number 4 team, quote unquote, according to the committee, and they're still only ranked 8th. I mean, are you serious with that question?
Well,
Minnesota might not get in being undefeated and beating Ohio State. They still might rank them 5th.
I don't know about that so much. I mean, granted,
that's obviously me joking, but no, there's no way that Minnesota is getting in as a one loss.
A one loss that would be. I would say Navy at 7-1 has a better chance of getting into the playoff than a one-loss Minnesota team does. Navy,
think about it,
or Appalachian State. I would take Appalachian State. They beat an SEC team. Why can't they be in?
Well, why don't we put Cincinnati in? I mean, Cincinnati's only losses to Ohio State. They can finish the season with only one loss to Ohio State.
Yeah, Cincinnati has the best loss, and that matters, right? That they have the best loss.
We can honestly agree that there's about 8 or 9 teams playing for one spot right now.
9 seems
I disagree with 8 or 9 teams. I think the teams playing for one spot is Georgia. Alabama is not playing for it. I don't see a scenario. I think there's a bit of Alabama fatigue in getting them in the playoffs. So I think it's between Georgia, Oregon, Minnesota have an outside chance of winning the Big Ten and getting in. But really, that's it. I think Oklahoma's done. I think Penn State's done. You can cross pretty much everyone from 7 down. I think you can cross off the list.
Yeah, it's like I don't know why they make this list more than 10 teams, to be honest. Like, why do we need to rank Oklahoma State? You know, why is Texas at 6-3 even on the board? I think all of that is just
part of it is that interesting group of 5 race that's going on right now at the bottom of the rankings with Cincinnati, Memphis, Appalachian State, Boise State, Navy, and the just dropped out but with one loss SMU team. Because right now that race for that Cotton Bowl spot is probably just as interesting as who's making the top 4.
I'm sure Jerry Jones is salivating at the chance that Minnesota plays in the Cotton Bowl. Trust me.
Minnesota against Cincinnati.
Oh,
what a matchup that's going to be.
I'm sure they'll fill up about 20,000 seats in the 100,000 seat stadium. So he's really excited about that.
They have Minnesota pegged for the Rose Bowl right now.
Oh, incredible. Wait, real show to put on for the LA tribe. All right, so it seems like we've said everything we need to say about the rankings. You know, these are going to change week to week, and we have several more weeks to go. So as we always do every week, we got 3 games on the go here that we're going to look at. The first game we'll look at is Oklahoma versus Baylor. Oklahoma is a 10.5-point favorite. Obviously, they're 8-1, and Baylor is 9-0 after winning in, what was that, a double overtime victory, I believe, this past week. Tony, Oklahoma, Baylor, who do you got?
So, I have Oklahoma, but Baylor covering. Everything that I have said about Minnesota being underrated, I can't say the same thing about Baylor. Their best wins have been against Kansas State and Oklahoma State. But, I mean, you have close wins against, Rice and Austin, and it doesn't scream, they're ranked 13th by the committee for a reason. And I think after losing, they'll drop even further because I think Oklahoma has better athletes. I mean, they definitely have the better quarterback with Jalen Hurts as compared to Charlie Brewer. But I think this is going to be, your typical Big 12 shootout. I mean, it's going to be in that, 44 to 36 range for sure.
Yeah, and let me rephrase that. They won by 6 points in 3 overtimes to TCU. Three overtimes. Ricky, what do you think about this game?
I think Oklahoma's going to win. I'm praying that Baylor wins because I really, really, really just want chaos at the end of the year, and I want there to be an undefeated conference champion, i.e. the Baylor Bears, that no one thinks deserves to be in the college football playoff, and hear all these Big 12 people whine and complain and say how they're being singled out. Meanwhile, this conference is absolutely dreadful. I mean, it is the most dreadful conference in football, and I would put the American Conference above it. But just for my own amusement, I'm really hoping Baylor wins this because I really want to see what the committee does with an undefeated Big 12 champion Baylor Bears and how they treat them when it comes time to rank the playoff teams.
Yeah, I mean, the Big 12, I would say since Colt McCoy graduated, has been in a real downfall. And this is – look, they got knuckled that one year where they didn't have the conference title game. They said they'd never have one, and then the following year they did. So they're trying everything they can, and this is just their worst-case scenario for them.
Honestly, this game is inconsequential because – they're just going to end up playing again in 4 weeks for the Big 12 title game anyway. So realistically, in my opinion, this game doesn't matter. It's going to matter in 4 weeks, though.
It might. Yeah, I guess you're right. Okay, so moving on. Maybe the biggest game of the weekend then, the most consequential game, I'd say, for the college football rankings is the number 4 ranked Georgia versus the number 12 ranked Auburn Tigers. Right now, Georgia is a 3-point favorite playing at Auburn. Ricky, what do you think about Auburn versus Georgia?
So I said a few weeks ago on the pod that Georgia would be the SEC champions and be going to the college football playoffs. So, and that was the week of their game against Florida, which they did end up winning. So I am going to stick to my guns on that. I've got Georgia in this game. I know it's on the road, which is great for Auburn's sake with their young quarterback. But I think Jake Fromm's got the experience. I think he's going to bring some veteran leadership to the table, and I expect Georgia to win another close one. But I think they'll pull it out.
All right, Tony. Do you think Bo Nix can lead the Auburn Tigers to an upset of the Georgia Bulldogs?
I believe he is the X factor in this game because to me, if Bo Nix plays the way he has against good teams so far, I think Georgia wins. If Bo Nix comes out and shows how much he's improved, I think we have a different story. But I think Georgia wins this. It's going to be a low scoring game, I think, than what people like. We'll say 20 to 14 range because, I mean, both teams, they like to rather being from, the wing T spread like Auburn to just ground and pound with Georgia. And, with that, they have great defenses, and it's going to be a slugfest for sure, I do believe. But here's an idea to note. If Auburn loses here and then in Alabama, does Gus leave Auburn for Arkansas? Just as a question posed.
Well,
why would you go to Arkansas?
Are they going to have a team left after the year?
Well, I mean, Gus Malzahn, he is an Arkansas boy.
That would be such a backwards move.
He has been on the proverbial hot seat at Auburn, since he started there, and it makes me wonder, would it be worth it for him to stay at Auburn?
Well, they've got a freshman quarterback that seems like he's going to be halfway decent. I feel like he'd want to stay for that at least.
I mean, just a thought. Just a thought.
No. at the end of the year, we will revisit this notion. All right, last one real quick. Ohio State is favored by 52 points over the 2-7 Rutgers team. Tony, will they cover 52?
Yes, give me the Buckeyes.
Ricky, will Ohio State cover the 52-point spread?
Absolutely.
Good. That's what I like to hear. I think there's a good chance. I don't see this in front of me, but I wonder what the odds are that they'll cover it in the first half. That's what I'm concerned about. That's where the big money's at. All right. So this has been a nice podcast today of the three guys analyzed. I'm your host, Matt. Tony, parting shot for the team.
Lock of the week this week, Washington State minus 10.5 against Stanford.
All right. Thank you, Tony. You have a good weekend. Ricky, parting shot here.
I'm watching the Browns play right now. Baker looks like he did at the end of his rookie season. We're up 7-0 against the Steelers, and we're on the road to 10-6 and grabbing that final and last wild card spot in the AFC. Let's go Browns.
Good luck to the Browns. And my last shot is, hey, download Disney Plus and watch The Mandalorian. It's great stuff. Thanks, guys, and have a nice day.